everyone, Steve Batman Statue Collector, and on today's Statue Chat, I just wanted to take a little bit of time and talk about some things that a lot of you were talking about on some of the Facebook groups, and that really comes down to sizes of statues. What is the best size of statue to collect? And that is a great question, and it's a question that I feel like is very individualized, but I wanted to tackle that a little bit today. So whenever I first started collecting, I didn't have any pieces really. I just collected 1/6 scale. Now those, of course, were the Hot Toys figures. Those were around the time the Dark Knight came out, so they started coming out with some of the Dark Knight stuff. I had 3 or 4 of those, and I also had a Captain Jack Sparrow 1/6 scale. I liked them, but then I discovered statues, and some of the statues that I started with were pretty small as well. Some small busts, some Gentle Giant Star Wars busts, things like that. They were my first kind of introduction into Polystone. And the great thing about them is they didn't take up very much space really at all. And so that was great. I had my little corner where I had my stuff. That has changed tremendously, of course, throughout the years. But what I noticed for me was that I kept going kind of up in scale. So I kind of went from that 1/6 scale, and then I went up to 1/4 scale. That is whenever I discovered Sideshow collectibles. Now, I have a whole bunch right behind me here of the 1/4 scale. It is a great scale, and it is still a lot of detail, and it doesn't take up a tremendous amount of space. Okay. But then Sideshow came out with the busts that are behind me. Those are, of course, life-size busts. Now, life-size takes up, of course, a lot of room, but it is just the bust. So really it's just kind of like a head and shoulders type thing, sometimes just the head on the life-size busts. So they take up sometimes as much room as a premium format with a base would take. Usually, of course, they are taller, but not always as wide. Maybe a premium format and a half, if you kind of look at it in those terms. But I really feel like, I really like the detail of the full size. They are kind of overwhelming. Sometimes they're a little creepy to people that come up and see them because they're like, whoa, why do you have a life-size thing in your collection? Well, I like a few of them. It's not something that I focus on. I like the full bodies of characters, and I like the art and the motion of them. But then I discovered Prime 1. And over here in my collection, I have a ton of 1/3 scale. And I've said it before on this channel that 1/3 scale to me is my personal favorite scale. I absolutely love it. I'll get back to that in a second. So then I went up again, and I went up to half scale. And of course I have my half scale. I had the Ben Affleck Batman from Prime 1, and I still currently have the half scale Joker, which is a favorite in my collection. Now I personally, even though I like this half scale, I would not want a full room of half scale figures. They are massive, and I just don't have the space. It really comes down to space for me. And I think that for a lot of collectors, when you're looking at sizes of statues, people either collect basically what they want. It doesn't matter whether it is a little tiny statue or a big statue. If people like the statue, a lot of times they will buy it. My one rule is I buy Batman statues, and it doesn't necessarily matter what the scale is as long as it's Batman related. That helps me budget. It helps me with my stress level because there's so many other things that I want. So that helps me there. Another thing that people always say is that it comes down to space. I am lucky enough to have this room here in my house, and I have the room for a certain amount of my 1/3 scales, and I mentioned that it is my favorite scale, and the reason it is because it has a tremendous amount of presence in my collection, and there's just so much more detail, I feel, on the 1/3 scales. Now, of course, I've had the half scales. I told some people this in some of my other videos, if you watched. I kind of got, sometimes whenever you have a half scale, I get a little bit of one of those those big giant Walmart figures that you can get when movies come out. Of course, they're way more detailed, but they're just so massive that I just don't feel like, even though they are highly detailed, I just don't feel like they look as cool as the 1/3 scale. Again, that is my preference. That's just what I prefer to collect. But it also has to do with space as well for me, because I have a big room here, but eventually I'm going to run out of space. And so then I'm going to have to question myself, if there are additional pieces that I'm going to want, what am I going to do? So people ask me all the time about the different scales, what the different scales mean, and if you're a newbie out there to the statue community, welcome. I'm really glad that you're here, and it's an exciting, exciting world. But you have to know how much you can afford and how much space you have, because that's really what it comes down to. Now, there are a lot of great lines out there. There are tremendous lines, not just Batman, but Marvel and Star Wars and everything in between, that you can find that are really good quality. There's just a tremendous amount out there. Even like 1/10 scale, which, Iron Studios, I'm going to give you a shout out. There's these little tiny Arkham line. They do Justice League as well, and some other lines, but they're really tiny, but they're chock full of detail. So if you don't have a lot of space, then that would be a perfect line for you to collect and still feel like you have that character represented in your collection. So I highly recommend that line. But if you're like me and have the space, and you have set aside the funds to do this, then I would personally recommend the 1/3 scale. Just because, again, I think that they are absolutely amazing. And until you see one in person, you really can't fully understand how cool these statues are. If you are somebody that has some space and your budget is kind of in the middle of the road, then I would recommend that you do the 1/4 scale. I have been really happy with my 1/4 scales. Again, I really like the premium formats that have the cloth. I feel like it adds a little bit more to it. The cut and sew elements. I know a lot of the Sideshow stuff now is more just fully sculpted. That's fine. But you're going to be able to get a lot of bang for your buck because you can fit a lot of them in your collection. Now, I have also noticed a trend here lately where some lines are going back to 1/5 scale or 1/6 scale that are fully sculpted. I know whenever I first got into the statue world, I remember Bowen was really popular. They're not really made anymore as far as I understand, but they were smaller, and a lot of people liked them because they could get a ton of them and keep churning out those different versions of characters that they didn't think that they would ever be able to get. They were able to do that with those smaller lines. You have a line, and I'll probably get this more in depth with a future video here about how deep should a line go. Specifically here, my Prime 1 line that they are not going to be continuing after this current run, which has upset me and a lot of other collectors. But at the same time, realistically, how deep do you go in a line? Now, a lot of times if you are producing these smaller statues, you can go on forever because people will probably keep buying them because they are cheaper. If I'm spending $900 on a 1/3 scale statue versus spending $100, I could buy 9 statues for that same cost. So you do the math there, and so I could see why a lot of collectors might be excited about the 1/5 or excited about the 1/6 scale. I know that XM Studios has just announced their DC Batman line, and what I've seen so far, it looks really cool. And I could see a lot of people jumping on those because you could get a lot of them displayed in a smaller area. I personally like the Joker one. I'll probably maybe pick up a few of those. I'm not exactly sure. Again, it's hard for me because I really like the way that 1/3 looks next to 1/4. I think it looks good as long as you separate the areas out. I don't think that having a 1/5 scale or 1/6 scale sitting right next to a 1/3 scale looks good. I just don't. That's just my personal opinion. I think that everything has to be kind of separated out into sections. That's why I have this case here separate from the rest of the room. Because of space. That was really the primary thing. B, I love the way this looks, and C, I don't want them to be next to each other because I don't think they look great next to each other. So that's another thing you might also consider is if you are going to be collecting different sizes, make sure that you have them kind of separated out. Now you might be somebody that likes them all mixed together, and again, that's awesome. That's just my opinion. I don't like that look near as well. I think that it kind of needs to have its own little space. But again, I can see why people are going to want to maybe, I feel like it's a trend, so to speak, of statue companies maybe starting to kind of go smaller because I think that they can get more. Again, you can get more bang for your buck in terms of space, quality, and you can get as many of those characters as they're going to make. Because if you have a Marvel line or a DC line, they can go very deep into the characters that people are going to want. And right now, I've noticed the trend too of everybody's kind of tired of the companies doing the same big stars, doing the Batmans, the Supermans, the Wonder Womans, the Jokers, the Green Lanterns. They're begging for some of the characters that they haven't done before. And I heard Sideshow say not too long ago on Sideshow Live that they are going to be, on this line here, they're going to be diving into Mr. Freeze and some of the other characters, maybe a Penguin. They haven't said that yet, but I would love to see a Penguin or a Two-Face. And I even asked that on Sideshow Live, and Susan answered that question because these are the characters that I think a lot of people are really wanting because they've never been done before. Now, of course, it's risky for the statue companies to do those because they might not sell as many. And so, I don't know, is it less risk to make them smaller instead of bigger? I just don't know. But again, I feel like all of this, no matter what size you like, whatever size you pick, it really comes down to personal preference, and it comes down to, again, how much money do you have to budget for these collections? How much space do you have? Do you have the room? If you have a small space, you're not going to be able to collect the 1/3s, even though you might want to. Or maybe get one 1/3 piece. It really, again, just comes down to that. I don't think that there is a perfect size because, again, I love the 1/4 scale back here, but I prefer, personally, the 1/3 scale. But that's because I have space, and that's because it's a line that I love. It's characters that I love. So, again, it comes down to your personal preference. It comes down to your space. It comes down to how much money you have. But, again, to me, there is no perfect, absolutely perfect deal. There's no perfect size because, if I didn't have the space, I wouldn't be able to say that 1/3 scale is my favorite because I wouldn't be able to display it, So, again, I feel like it just really comes down to the amount of space you have. And, do you have a focus? Do you have a specific spot for that statue? Will it fit there? These are all things I think you have to think about before you pre-order. At least I do. Every single purchase I make is considered for this space. Where is it going to go in this space? And if I don't have room for it, what's going to have to be sold? What's going to have to get out of this cave? So I feel like there's a lot of things you have to think about, not only in terms of size, but also space and money when it comes to this particular hobby. I feel like I've rambled on too long now, but I want to know your opinion down below. What is your thought on space? What is your thought on sizes of statues? Do you feel like there is a perfect size? Do you wish that a certain statue company would focus on certain sizes? Please let me know what your thoughts are down below because I would love to read them. I'm curious as to what you feel. Again, these are just all my opinions. I really want to read what you have to think because I am excited. I'm excited about collecting, and I know you are too, and I would love to read what you have to say. All right, again, I've rambled on long enough. Thank you guys so very much for watching. I've got a lot of exciting news coming up in the next few weeks. It's very exciting. We also have San Diego Comic-Con and Wonderfest coming up, so 2 big events. And I also have some very, very special things planned for that same time. So be ready for that. I'm excited. I can't wait to share the big surprise. But it's coming up. So thank you guys again so very much for watching. Please like, comment, and subscribe. And as always, I'll see you right here in the Batcave.